Once a game is out into the wild, has made its impact, and is written into gaming history books, it often takes an immutable shape. The way that it looks and plays is burned into the minds of gamers and is unshakable, so it's easy for most people to forget alternative takes on the classic that get lost in the shadow of its reputation. I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 weird versions of iconic games you didn't know existed. Number 10. Bioshock, iOS. 2K Games' Bioshock was an immersive 2007 FPS that unified Xbox, PlayStation, PC and Mac players with their praise for it. It also seriously impressed those with iPhones in 2014 with a surprising mobile port. Bioshock on iOS doesn't really need any alternative features or modes, its sheer existence is novelty in itself. Whilst various video game IPs made their way to mobile platforms in the 2010s, Bioshock stood out because it was just a straight up port of an Xbox 360 and PS3 game. Naturally, it wasn't as pretty, but the sacrifice in visual quality doesn't harm the game's powerful atmosphere. The controls were all now touchscreen, which could be a touch finicky, but really the quibbles with this port's gameplay were minor. The real issues came twofold. First of all, as a AAA game coming to mobile, it was a tad more expensive than your standard fare, coming in at $15. This still isn't bad for a big story-driven experience, but it was the support that annoyed fans. Gamers who dropped cash for Bioshock found themselves unable to play it over time as Apple rolled out iOS updates, and by 2017 the game was officially announced as dead. Which is a damn shame because it was an impressive step on the long road of mobile gaming, now lost forever. Number 9. Half-Life, PlayStation 2. The 1990s saw the rise of gaming in mainstream media, with the console war between Sega and Nintendo and the early emergence of 3D graphics on the PlayStation. Whilst consoles fought for consumers' hard-earned cash, PC gaming never really entered the mainstream conversation until Half-Life. Valve's narrative-driven FPS title caught the attention of the gaming landscape and made a lot of people PC gamers for the first time. Famously, the game was in production for Dreamcast for a while, but was unceremoniously cancelled. 2 years after its original release, however, Half-Life was ported to PlayStation 2. Largely, it's a faithful and enjoyable version of the beloved classic. What makes it weird, however, is that it's the only place to play Half-Life Decay. This new campaign is a fluid cooperative experience, allowing you and a friend to blast headcrabs and solve puzzles together. It's also relevant to the story, starring Gina Cross and Colette Green, and taking place around the original campaign. Remember those missing HEV suits from the start of Half-Life? Well, this story ties up both major and minor loose ends like these. Whilst a version of the Decay campaign was planned for PC, it never happened. Outside of fan-made mods, this unique Half-Life experience is trapped on the PS2. Number 8. Aladdin, Nintendo Game Boy. Whilst video games releasing across multiple platforms has been standardised for a long time now, it wasn't always the case. Nowhere is this perhaps more readily apparent nor divisive as Disney's Aladdin. Based upon the movie, 2 totally different games were released for both Mega Drive and Super Nintendo. The question always was, and still is, which is better, but the true discussion should be around all the other adaptations this film got. It was also brought quietly to Master System and NES, as well as Game Gear, Game Boy and Game Boy Color. You'd think that the Game Boy versions would be ports of Capcom's venture for SNES, but that's not the case, although that did release for the GBA in 2002. Instead, the Game Boy games are based on Virgin Interactive's Mega Drive release. A strange choice indeed, considering one of the high points of this version was the hand-drawn animations, which do not translate well to the underpowered handheld. The game runs quite poorly, with a chugging frame rate and gameplay that relies heavily on blind jumps. The later Game Boy Color port improves things, but not by much. The 2 home console Aladdin games are the perfect representation of the difference in hardware during the 90s, but the wider picture is much more confusing, with these Game Boy versions standing out as particularly odd curios. Number 7. Counter-Strike, Microsoft Xbox. Counter-Strike is one of gaming's greatest grassroots success stories in some ways. Starting life as a fan-made mod of Half-Life, it proved to be so popular that its creators entered an agreement with Valve to sell the rights. The company would then go on to market it, produce sequels, and so on. One thing Valve decided to do was bring the game from the PC to the home console in 2003 with an overlooked Xbox port. For one thing, it's overlooked for a good reason, and it's not necessarily its quality. Counter-Strike is a cornerstone of PC FPS titles, its fast-moving mouse and keyboard gameplay setting a standard for multiplayer games games on the Windows platform. Putting this on a console and a controller, of course, felt outright wrong to many fans. For what it's worth, Counter-Strike on Xbox worked surprisingly well when its servers were live, and even then the game included bots for offline play. Its development was troubled, with several teams all pitching in, and it does show. The high recoil of many weapons in the game, which works very well for correcting with mouse on PC, doesn't translate to the twin sticks. However, it did have exclusive maps for a time, and even had the radial weapon UI from Counter-Strike Global Offensive about 10 years early. Number 6. Diablo, PlayStation 1. Porting great PC shooters to console is one thing, but there are some styles of game that are a bigger ask. Around the turn of the millennium, role-playing games, particularly Western ones, tended to fare better on computers. So the first Diablo coming to PlayStation was an odd choice. Unable to use the point-and-click movement system, this version allows players to take more direct control of their character, which really helps immersion. Furthermore, online play of the PC version is swapped out for local co-op, which actually adds to the feeling of camaraderie between you and your second player. It's clear that this is a port that has had some real love and care put into it, rather than feeling like an odd obligation. Still, Diablo on PlayStation has its faults. For example, its data demand meant that players would probably need to buy a designated Diablo memory card, as the game took up 10 out of 15 blocks. That's not great. Otherwise, however, it's more solid than expected. Diablo is often called one of the greatest PC games of all time, but its PlayStation sibling is certainly nothing to be sniffed at. Number 5. Resident Evil 2 Gamecom. After its success in 1998 on the PlayStation, Capcom's survival horror masterpiece Resident Evil 2 got a string of fairly consistent ports. It also got a wildly different remake built from the ground up, and it's not the one you're thinking of. At the end of the 90s, Tiger Electronics tried to make their way into the handheld console market with the Gamecom. Interestingly, it had a touchscreen and internet connectivity way before either were standard features. Unfortunately, these things couldn't save it from being an ugly, underpowered turd which has been rightfully lost to the sands of time. More than half of the grand total of 21 games released for it were ports, but perhaps the boldest was Resident Evil 2. Ripping apart this clunky monochromatic version seems cruel because it's already fighting from behind considering the hardware. Sure, it helps to have the original game as context because the port severely slims things down, even outright cutting one of the two playable characters, but in all fairness it does reflect the majority of iconic rooms in the Raccoon City Police Department quite well. The grainy visuals and lack of music add to the weird otherness of the game, instilling its own kind of horror. Out of all the ports of RE2, this is by far the one you'd have the least fun with, but it's hard to outright hate something that managed to get so much out of so little. Number 4. Command & Conquer Nintendo 64. RTS games and home consoles can be oil and water. The systems often just heavily rely on mouse and keyboard, as well as hardware powerful enough to render a game's map and track everything going on within it. As such, any concerns that Command & Conquer Red Alert on PlayStation would be a flop were absolutely understandable. And yet it was anything but, and Red Alert remains the most iconic entry in the franchise, in part due to the PlayStation's install base, meaning that the brand was now available to more people than ever before. Enter Nintendo, who clearly looked over Sony's fence and saw this. Wanting their own take, they made a deal to get the original Command & Conquer onto the N64. This was already an odd choice, as either way the game was going to need significant development time, so they should have just created a new entry instead of porting a game significantly older than the PS1's Red Alert. Handled by a third party, the final release was a mess. Bad graphics, bad audio, and the removal of FMVs stung, but the game actually did control surprisingly okay. Still, it felt like it was outdated on release because of the bizarre choice in which entry to port. Number 3. Daikatana, Nintendo Game Boy. Most entries on this list are classic games that are iconic because they've been lauded critically and or commercially. In this case, the reverse is true. Daikatana was a disaster. It proclaimed that John Romero, designer of Wolfenstein and Doom, was about to make you his bitch with his upcoming title, which is not just a bold but also a weird claim to make. Of course, this drove players away from the game, causing it to make a fraction of its budget back in sales. Whilst Romero made a mistake approving that particular piece of marketing, his desire for an adventure game style Game Boy Color version was a stroke of genius. Stylized on games like The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening and Final Fantasy Adventure, Daikatana for GBC is a top-down dungeon explorer. It follows the game's basic premise but swaps out the gameplay for more fluid combat, puzzling, and even some platforming elements, which is a rarity for the genre. The PC game's infamously bad AI is nowhere to be found, and instead the player alternates through Daikatana's party members as they play. day. It's not a revelation for the genre or anything, but perhaps for the IP. It's a Daikatana game that isn't bloated, outdated and barely functional, which is what the name is usually associated with. Number 2. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, Nintendo 3DS. In retrospect, the 3DS was a weird console, and whilst a massive success, its first few years were rocky as it tried to find its place in the industry. Landing around the time of the console's first anniversary, Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater 3D boggled the minds of players. Sure, Nintendo had proven that the 3DS was a big improvement performance-wise over the original DS, but to hear it was running one of the most demanding PS2 games was something that raised a great many eyebrows. Naturally, of course, it is hardly a flawless experience. The frame rate chugs, particle effects are often outright missing, and the graphics have taken a hit. However, it's not all bad. Because of the nature of the control on the 3DS and the release of the Circle Pad Pro add-on, who remembers that, MGS plays a little differently on this console to every other version. There's now over-the-shoulder gunplay, the ability to move and shoot, and to fire your weapon with a trigger rather than a face button. The game also featured plenty of other features like gyro aiming, the ability to make your own camo for Snake to wear by taking photos of something, and collectible Yoshis. At the time, the idea of MGS3 running on the 3DS felt huge, but in the long run, it's become a weird footnote in the sagas of both the console and the franchise. Number 1. Skyrim, Amazon Alexa. Amazon, despite being one of the biggest companies in the world, have not had the most graceful attempt at entering the gaming sphere despite their best efforts. New World, their 2021 MMORPG, has been the best of the bunch so far, but they're yet to have their first huge hit. However, they've at least got what every platform needs, a version of Skyrim. The Elder Scrolls V's habit of getting a new release every time the sun comes up was played for laughs one year at E3 with a cute video of comedian Keegan-Michael Key. Sat talking to his Amazon Echo, he used his mouth to play a version of Skyrim narrated by Alexa. Most people thought it was a joke, had a laugh about it, and moved on. But no, in fact, it is real. Anybody who owns an Alexa-compatible device can simply kick off a new adventure in the fantasy realm of the Elder Scrolls using only their words and imagination to guide them. It's a distinctly different experience, but one that really needs to be done at least once by every gamer out there. Skyrim still gets re-releases today, and it's only a matter of time until the next one, but none are quite as unique or as inspired as this very special edition for Amazon Alexa. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Which of these weird ports have you played? And of course, let us know of any others that we didn't include. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Si for WhatCulture, and have a good week.